So Ryan, thank you so much on behalf of SETSI for participating in our Community of Practice channel on YouTube. We really appreciate your leadership at this time. Thanks again.
My pleasure. Yeah, thank you for having me.
All right. So as we always do, we give all things by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands that we are on. We also acknowledge our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all the elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, learn for our collective liberation and sovereignty. So if you can please do us the honors by introducing yourself to our listeners and viewers and let us know about your remarkable work.
Sure, thank you. Well, my name is Ryan St. Germaine, and I guess I'm a lot of things. I'll start with I'm a proud Métis. I'm also a Doukhobor and a Scouse. So, the Doukhobor history is quite interesting as well. We were exiled apparently from Russia at a certain point. I knew my grandpa as Bill Craig, and his real name was Ivan Svetlikov. So he definitely tried to distance himself from that. And I'm also a proud Métis. So my grandpa side of the family, my dad's dad was from Red River originally, the family, and then more recently would have been Fort Capel and those areas in Saskatchewan. And very proud to be Métis. My uncles and my dad are very proud to be Métis, but when I was 6 weeks old, my grandpa was murdered, and he was the connection to that side of my family. So, and my grandma, I think, to protect the boys, had kind of forbidden them from speaking with Schiff, which I believe might have even been illegal at the time. And, they went to Catholic school and all those things as well, too. There was anything wrong with that, but they're very much kind of, I've learned in older life that my uncles all act Italian. I'm quite, pale. And so you don't notice the Indigenous heritage, but they're quite dark. And I just thought it was funny growing up. And I realized it's like, maybe they were trying to blend in, who knows? So that's kind of my Indigenous background. And then, in startup world, I was very fortunate. My dad was very entrepreneurial, my uncles as well. And so I grew up, I watched my dad go bankrupt. So he took all the risks, and then I watched him build up his businesses, and I was cheap labor. So I was very fortunate to, I washed dishes in a frozen meals business and swept parkades for a maintenance contracting business and all kinds of interesting stuff. But it was very natural for me to start a business. And so I guess the other, if we're talking about my professional career, the easiest way to describe me is I like startups, and I'm pretty good at them. I've done them a number of times. And in February 2020, I ended up selling a network of job boards and to a private equity company, and said I'm going to be traveling the world. And then in March, it's like, no, I'm going to be hanging out in lockdown with everybody else. And you know what? Funny, nobody cared. They said, oh, you exited your business and now you got to stay at home. But I support you. I said, okay, fair enough. So that's a little bit of background on me, and then maybe I can talk a little. Would you like me to kind of dive into kind of the journey since selling the business and that sort of thing?
Yeah, you know what we can do, that was beautiful, by the way. I mean, I love your rich history, and that's why we say our acknowledgement, and we acknowledge ancestors. We acknowledge our elders, and that's who you brought forth. So we thank you. That was great. So what I'll say to you, can you articulate your personal mission and vision for us, and what inspires you about your work? Then you can tie in what you'd like to tie in.
Sure. Well, and I think those do actually tie in quite closely together. And so when I sold the business, I had time on my hands. And so part of it was a process of discovery. I wanted to learn more about my roots. And so, family had citizenship. And so I got my citizenship, and family tree work had been done as with the Métis Nation of BC. And I started interviewing family members. I went back to Batoche when it was safe to do so, and just really started to dive into culture and tried to learn more. And part of that journey, I've always been somebody, it's in my DNA to bring people together. And so I started to ask, where are the indigenous tech people at? And people would say that there aren't any. And I would, pardon my words here, but I would respectfully say, bullshit. I don't believe that. And so that led me on a journey of connecting with some really amazing Indigenous tech founders. And while I was doing other things, it grew to 160 odd members now on Slack, and we meet virtually monthly. And so my mission has been to create equitable outcomes for Indigenous people through technology, and to break down barriers and silos. We have, how do we strengthen our community? We need to really come together, and with, less than 1% in digital related jobs, I think less than 1% on boards for Indigenous people. Stat that I'm still verifying, but 0.004% getting venture funding. It's really not good enough. And so there's work to be done. And so that's where my passion lies, and how do we create equitable outcomes, and how do we strengthen our communities so that we can do that work for ourselves.
Wow, that's great. You did remarkable research. Like, you didn't take that as faith to say, oh, there is none. No, you went digging, and that's what it is. It's about really pulling out that data, doing your own self work, and you can feel that it's the passion that you have. So that's what it's all about, passion driven, purpose that we're doing. So that's great. So on the flip side, like, what challenges or barriers have you faced, and how are you able to overcome them?
Sure. I mean, I guess still work in progress. In terms of barriers, it's weird when you realize the Indigenous story is yours, right? Like, I didn't, when you're busy going about business and maybe a little bit disconnected, you don't think about like the repercussions or the ripples. But I do think, I was one of the first, not the only family member, but one of the first to graduate high school even. And so, I didn't see it as a barrier. Like, I would ask my dad about things where he would say, I say, hey, did you ever experience racism or anything like that? And, he's got quite a bit darker skin. And my dad would say, no, but it's his way of looking at the world, right? I think probably he might have. I talked to other family members and have had a different experience. That's just how my dad sees it. And I think it's a beautiful way to be. I think sometimes you can acknowledge it as well too, but doesn't always help all that much. It's like, what can I effectively do to move forward and to move things forward? So I tend to look at things in that regard, whilst realizing that, there's, I don't have the pedigree of, somebody who's now in venture and, starting to get involved in venture and a lot of other areas, but I'm very comfortable. I know I can play there. And so I think that confidence comes from experience. And I hope that answered your question.
Oh yeah, for sure. I can even relate too, because funny, I have Jamaican background. My mother, when she came here to Canada, first of all, my mother and father came here from Jamaica. They love Papa Trudeau. We have to say Papa Trudeau, not the son Trudeau. Mm-hmm. They love Papa Trudeau because he was the one that actually helped open the doorway for them to come in, and also to get housing really cheap, get a mortgage. And from that, then she would tell me stories. In Canada, I've never experienced racism because, she said her first job, she was like a maid for a Jewish family, but they treated her so well. It was, you know what I mean? So it's all about that experience, not knowing maybe there are some hidden, things in there, but like you said, it's a beautiful thing because that's what my mother experienced. That's what they experienced. And it was fine for them. It was wonderful for them. So I can relate to what you're saying about that as well. I hear you. Okay. And so what kind of priorities, what's your key priorities right now that you're working on?
Key priorities is to really is one, I want to see more Indigenous-led businesses. So really the key priority for me is how do we support the growing ecosystem? Because there are a lot of businesses. I think Indigenous businesses are growing at double the rate startups of other businesses. So how do we start nurturing those companies and helping them get access to the things they need? I do think a lot of times we are over mentored and underfunded, but starting with some to say that now, piloting a project with New Ventures BC to mentor 8 Indigenous founders. Very fortunate. Angie from New Ventures is wonderful. And she asked me if I wanted to do something together. And I said, absolutely. And so she said, do you want to mentor 6 founders? I said, how about 8? She says, you think you can find 8? I said, I have no idea. And we ended up, having 18 folks enroll, and I'm working with my first cohort now. But one of the other things that I said is, what's the point in funding folks if we are teaching people how to start businesses if we don't fund them or give them the supports that they need? And so fortunately, with timing, I joined Raven Capital as an external IC member, and I'm doing some executive and resident work there. And so that's helping me to kind of learn at the seed stage. But what do we do with the ones that are at, anyone that says friends, family, and fools for an Indigenous company doesn't get it by and large. I mean, sure, not to say, I was very fortunate. I knew I was never going to starve, and I had a place to go to when I started a business, but risk is very different for different people. And so I knew I wasn't going to starve and I wasn't putting anyone at risk. What about a single mom who's got a couple of kids? And if they mess up, then they're out on the streets, and so that's a very different scenario. So how do we get a $10,000 check or $100,000 check to those folks that have amazing ideas and amazing potential, but it's not a level playing field? And that builds the funnel, which then allows companies like Raven, venture funds like Raven, to invest when they're at that seed or at that Series A stage. So that's where I'm focused right now is how do we support those businesses in a good way to achieve the things that they want to do, and also not fit them into the mold, right? Because when I think about systemic barriers, I do think there's a lot of systemic barriers, and sometimes it's not even racism. I think about procurement and all the procurement, 5% in federal, provincial, municipal. A lot of public companies have those mandates as well, but it's easy to choose the safe bet. And so if you don't have scale of business, it's easy to choose a company that's got these points or these things, but doesn't really build Indigenous-led assets. So how do we start getting some of these companies to scale?
Awesome. Yeah. Everything you were saying is right on the money. And, there's somebody that interviewed that says collaboration is the only solution for system change. And like you said, you're dealing with Raven Capital. We love them so much. We work with them all the time, and they're really doing great things with outcomes financing. They're really the ones that carved that. So this is the type of information and data that we need to get results, right? So that's very good.
They're leading the way.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. So let me ask you, how do you feel about the future of social impact in Canada?
It's a big question. And to be honest, I don't know. I could try to wax on poetic about it, but I don't know. I do think that there's a lot of work to be done. I see a lot of people have very good intentions until you ask them to cut a check. And so I think when you're asking companies at a nascent stage to generate profits and do all these big things and scale up to these levels, but you also say now you have all these other added things that you have to do, that's a pretty tough lift. All of a sudden you've actually made it harder to be that type of business opposed to and so the funding requirements for that, we tend to be a little conservative, right? We bet and invest on the things that we know. And so I think if we want to move the needle, we need to break some eggs. And I said this, I said this on stage, and I got a good reaction because it's nice when you get to an age where you kind of just say it how you see it, and hopefully it lands well. And that, a lot of the LPs out there that say that they want to help, or a lot of the impact, fund of funds that say they want to help, they might not be all that risky. They're looking for methods and signals that they get that are standard, and they're not going to find them. And so if we want to actually impact, and nobody really wants to touch pre-seed or earlier on, find creative vehicles that will help support and give those checks. And unless we break some eggs and iterate, we're never going to get there. So I believe funds need to be profitable. It has to work. But we have to think about this on a longer scale, and we have to think about the blue ocean and the opportunity that is there if we can experiment and startup. You got to place bets, and it's about optionality. A lot of them are going to fail. The ones that will succeed will lead the way, and there's an opportunity to be first here. The Indigenous community is going from 30 billion to 100 billion, I think, in the next handful of years. I forget the timeline, but not too long from now. The amount of businesses is growing at more than double the rate of the rest of the market. And funny, there was a group that was trying to help support Indigenous businesses, because I won't name the company name, but they thought, we've got this platform and we have these customers, and we're going to do the good thing and we're going to help them out. And somebody on their team who was Indigenous said, do we actually know how they're performing right now? And they were looking for Indigenous, and most Indigenous people don't label themselves Indigenous. We've got Indigenous Tech Circle, but we just call it Tech Circle. We know who we are. And so she started to aggregate the data and look at the different nations and sort of map companies that way. And she went back to the company and said, no, you shouldn't do this out of the goodness of your heart. You should do it because they're outperforming everybody else. And so, this narrative that we have, I've seen through Tech Circle, there is amazing businesses. Is it equitable? No. But to my point earlier when I said bullshit, there's a lot of amazing companies out there and they're doing great work. We have the foundation, and these are successful, talented people that can lead the way for future generations if we let them, if we give them the tools they need.
They need, exactly. So true. So what's your ultimate goal, and what does success look like to you?
I want, you know what, I'm going to steal something from Jeff Ward at Anamiki. When people talk about technology and I want them to say, oh, you know what, Indigenous people lead the way there. They're really good at that. And to know that Indigenous people have been doing technology for a long time. It's not like we were simple, you know. That's why it's funny. Like I always have, I'm very much Métis and very connected, but I also grew up not so. So it's always still, I've been welcomed in, and people have given me permission where I didn't think I had it before. So it's strange. But when you look at, you know, my Indigenous roots and the folks in Tech Circle and businesses at large, they're standing on the foundation of folks that have done it for, you know, since the beginning of Indigenous people being here, which has been a long time.
That's it. And that's the call out to that, you know, there's nothing that we have to prove to ourselves, but it seems that this society sometimes make you have to say, oh, Indigenous this and you know, Black that led that. We have to get to a point in time where it, you know, it just is. That's what we do. That's who we are. Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No need for this.
And I think the Black community, my partner was talking about this as well too. The Black community has done a really good job of building from within. It's not as it's the other thing is too. We need to support each other. Like, how do we fund and support each other? How do we invest in our own successes and create that circular economy for ourselves? Where you know, if we have wins, let's invest back in our community. Let's be the first one cutting checks to the next generation.
That's right.
And I think that grassroots that creates strength. I've you know, been experimenting with a lot of different things this year, and there's a lot of wonderful organizations that are helping that are non-Indigenous, and we want allies. Please, we need more support. But I think it has to start with us, and it can be a distraction sometimes looking externally for funding and all these other things. And so, like, how do we lift each other up and you know, get that as an added bonus, but we don't need it? How do we be scrappy and entrepreneurial and lift ourselves up?
That's right. That's right. Very good. Well, Ryan, this has been a really inspirational, very powerful session today. And the last question I have for you is, do you have any closing thoughts or calls to actions today?
Any closing thoughts or calls to action? You know, I wish I had something more poetic to give here, but I think I would just say, you know, it's really wonderful that, you know, there's programs like this out there that are bringing people together, because we are, the more I've learned about myself, the more it's created empathy and understanding in terms of, you know, like, the stories are often the same, different. We're all unique people and coming from different places, but, you know, underrepresented is underrepresented, and whether it's by, you know, ethnicity or gender or age or, you know, or sexual orientation, we all tend to have similar struggles and similar things and similar challenges that we face systemically. So, you know, I think it's important for us to all collaborate together and to support and lift each other up, and choosing that collaboration over competition, I think, creates some unique advantages for us all.
That's it. Love that. Collaboration over competition. You hear that? Write that down. Put it on your wall. That's great. Well, Ryan, thank you so much. We appreciate everything that you do, your leadership, your time today. And I know it won't be the last time. Of course, we always work with Raven, and we'll definitely be working with you as well. And, you know, just really, like, you know, I always say we lay the foundation, but it's really the future generation that we're doing this for. So we always have to keep that in the back of our mind and use a purpose-driven, you know, model to get this out there so that changes can actually be made. And it's not just, you know, verbal diarrhea.
Love it. Yeah.
Yeah. Let me close the way that we began by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands that we are on. We also acknowledge our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toil without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all the elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, learn for our collective liberation and sovereignty. So once again, thank you so much. You have a wonderful rest of the day, and we will be in touch.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Oh.